Thank you to Tom for inviting me to talk to you all today. My name's Alex McDonald and I am a flood risk management advisor for the Environment Agency based in our East Midlands area. I'm actually a member of SIEM and I've got a background in ecology and environmental assessment. I've previously worked for the Environment Agency for about 9 years, doing jobs as a biodiversity officer and environmental project manager. So I've been involved in a whole range of different flood risk schemes. And most recently, I've been project managing some of our pilot projects as part of the DEFRA Natural Flood Management pilot programme, which I'll talk to you in a little bit as we go through this presentation. So the things that I'm going to cover today is what are the drivers for natural flood management and nature-based solutions, focusing on a local level in terms of what some of our catchments are like in the East Midlands and how we can use those techniques to try and tackle some of those projects. I'm going to focus a lot on drawing out the lessons from the DEFRA Natural Flood Management pilot projects that we've been working on in the East Midlands. I've got some thoughts kind of around design with the different organisations we've worked with to deliver those techniques. We'll show you some of the initial monitoring findings from some of the pilot projects and then talk around what we're doing at the moment within the East Midlands to look at how we build natural flood management projects into a more business as usual approach within the Environment Agency. So I think it's probably clear to everybody, and I definitely take a deep breath every winter, every time there's a lot of rain. We're getting more and more extreme events, whether that's drought or flooding, and you do kind of watch the window at what's happening to the watercourses, and we're seeing communities get hit time and again by large events. So the photos on the screen are of Belper, where I'm based, and that's my local Morrison's car park. So seeing the amount of water, this was from kind of November 2019, that's coming down the rivers, that's affecting the communities, and speaking with those people that have been affected, it really drives it home that we've got a massive challenge on our hands in terms of managing flood risk and also trying to protect those communities and trying to give them an offer and a solution that helps them. In the East Midlands area, we've got about 193 communities that are at risk and around like 3,700 homes that are at significant flood risk. So it's quite a challenge. A lot of them are small, isolated communities, so it's not just the big urban areas that are at risk. So trying to find a solution that benefits all of those people really needs a catchment-based approach to try and tackle the flood risk and pull in the other factors within the catchments as well. I've been working on natural flood management or kind of nature-based solutions for at least the past 4 years, and it's been really interesting to see how policy and ambition has changed since then. There's a lot of talk in terms of the climate emergency, the biodiversity emergency, everything has kind of shot up the radar. And it's not just the select few that are talking about it, it's much more widespread use in language and day-to-day conversations with people. And that's translated into policy as well. So there's definitely a big drive and backing behind using more nature-based solutions and looking at how we can deliver those for multiple benefits. Also looking at using those net environmental gain, trying to meet the ambitions for climate resilient places, tackling flood risk, water supply and water quality as well. And released the other week was the Environment Agency's climate ambition, talking around what we're going to do to help to reach the net zero carbon target by 2030. And a lot of this also links in with how we manage flood risk. So construction is our biggest carbon emitter within the Environment Agency. That's obviously helping communities through damages avoiding and reducing the carbon that's released, but it's also one of the big kind of challenges in trying to reduce our carbon footprint as an organisation. And some of these aspects can be done through using more nature-based solutions, as we'll go on to have a little look through in this presentation. So trying to reduce the carbon within construction, but also using it to help manage flood risk as well. And it'll be interesting to see how that develops over the coming years. So looking at a little more detail and thinking about the East Midlands area, how we've split up is around water management catchments. So this map on the left-hand side shows the East Midlands. We've got 4 water management catchments, and they are with the main rivers of the Derwent coming through Derbyshire and through Derby. We've got the Soar going through Leicester, and then the River Trent going through Nottingham and up to the Humber. We've got the main cities and conurbations, but we've also got the moors of the Peak District down to the pump catchments of the Isle of Axholme. So it's really quite varied across the whole area, and the solutions that we look at might not be as suitable for some catchments as they would do for others. Predominantly, the land use is farmland, so and then urban area, and a lot of our water courses are of moderate to poor quality under the Water Framework Directive. We've had some work done very recently looking at kind of baselining the natural capital value of that area. And in terms of the value from ecosystem services we're at about 3.8 billion per year, with the biggest one being water supply. But interestingly, we've also got catchments that are suffering quite severely from over abstraction issues as well. When we look into some of the details around things like carbon sequestration and hazard regulation, the values that we get from those are pretty low, and it's been driven by degraded peat in the moorlands. So a lot of the moorlands of the Derbyshire and the Peak District, the peat has been degraded and eroded away, and it's actually a carbon source rather than a carbon sink. And also across the whole of the area, we've only got about 4.5% woodland. So although this is kind of low on that carbon sequestration hazard regulation side of it, if we could use these nature-based solutions to improve our natural assets and our natural capital within the area, we've also got a big opportunity for tackling some of the flood risk side and producing those other benefits as well. So I think in terms of how I'm seeing it, there's definitely lots to play with, and some of the techniques that we can use I'll go through the presentation in a little bit. So this is just to reiterate some of the challenges that we've got. These photos are from just over the border in Staffordshire, but it kind of relates the issues we've got. So within the East Midlands area, our moorlands aren't acting as they should do. They're not providing those hazard regulation services. The blanket bog area, due to its geographical location between Manchester and Sheffield, has had a history of pollution, which has degraded that habitat, affected the sphagnum mosses that build up that blanket bog. We've seen severe drying out of the peat, and generally every summer there's a barbecue that sets fire, and it's affecting a large amount of habitat there. And the picture on the top left is from a fire damaged area of the moorland there. There's a lot of work being done by the Moors for the Future Partnership, working to try and re-wet and re-establish this habitat right at the top of the catchments. As you can see, it's a very hard task. With that bottom right-hand picture, you can see the eroded gully, the bare peat that's washing off, not holding water. So there's challenge, but there's also opportunity to start making our catchments function as they once would have done, to hold water in that upland area, slow the flow and regulate how that's released downstream for benefits of downstream communities, but to also start to restore and turn the kind of tide on the loss of ecology and biodiversity that we're getting in those areas. If we look further downstream, we're also seeing some of the challenges that we've got. We've got water and flow routes coming off the land, and very obviously washing soil away as well. So there's quite a lot of different things that we can try and tackle through nature-based solutions. And when I'm talking about this in NFM, NFM is around the kind of flood risk techniques that we're using to manage that. But it fits within that wider suite of nature-based solutions, looking at how we replicate and restore ecosystems, and within that wider terminology of working with natural processes. So they're all interchangeable, but a lot of the things I will talk around is the kind of flood risk management aspect of it. The photos on the screen here are some of the solutions that we've put in with partners. We work really closely with different partners, such as the Trent Rivers Trust. So that bottom left-hand corner is a leaky barrier that they've installed in a Cockerbeck catchment above Loudon. The top picture is one that we've done on the River Soar at Croft, which I'll go into in a bit more detail. And the bottom right is some of the works that Moors for the Future have been doing in the Peak District National Park. And when we're looking at NFM and implementing it, it's with that mind that it is part of the jigsaw of solutions to managing flood risk and creating more climate resilient communities as well. And it might be that in urban areas, it's more suited to kind of sustainable urban drainage or blue-green infrastructure, but it does have a part to play and can help improve and slow and store water as well within the catchment. So just thinking about some of the lessons learned, over the past 4 years, we've been working as part of the national NFM pilot programme. And the main projects within the East Midlands area have been Loudon, which is on the Cockerbeck catchment, and Trent Rivers Trust have been leading on. And we've got the Soar, which is just upstream of Leicester City, which I've been leading on behalf of the Environment Agency. And the kind of drivers for these projects was to improve the evidence base for natural flood management. It was to look at how you can develop techniques that manage flood risk, but also provide multiple benefits as well, and to install monitoring to improve the evidence base and collect data around the effectiveness of these measures. Through all of these schemes, we absolutely couldn't have got them on the ground without working in partnership. And a lot of the benefit of the projects has been to develop partnerships with organisations that we don't necessarily see on a day-to-day basis or work with, such as the district councils. And working and bringing in partners and stakeholders to collaborate on the schemes has had knock-on effects in terms of other projects. It's built those kind of lasting relationships, and organisations are working together that they didn't do before. So this top left-hand photo is a picture of some Environment Agency colleagues, as well as Atkins and Leicestershire and Rutland Wildlife Trust. And it's on one of the recce's on Leicestershire and Rutland Wildlife Trust Nature Reserve at Narborough Bog, where we've done some of the natural flood management work. The bottom left-hand photo is Ian Morrissey from Atkins and Nick May from EcoSolace, and they have been absolutely integral in helping me get sites on the ground for the River Soar project. And the emphasis and the collaborative environment that we've all built together has managed to get through lots of hurdles, from landowners to adverse weather impacts to COVID. And I think that pulling together and that building of that partnership and that working arrangements has really meant that we've managed to get schemes on the ground. And then on the bottom right, we've got Alan Graham from Trent Rivers Trust, and Alan, Josh and Kim have been absolutely integral on getting schemes on the ground, particularly in the Cockerbeck catchment and other catchments, and have been really key in the landowner engagement side of that, and working with a wide amount of stakeholders across a catchment. So as I mentioned, getting landowners on board to be able to deliver schemes has been absolutely crucial. And these thoughts are from Josh from Trent Rivers Trust. So a lot of the time, I think we see that the Environment Agency is seen by landowners as a regulator, and it can have quite a negative perception of ourselves if we come in and we're speaking to them and we're trying to ask to do something on their land, and it can be maybe perceived as quite heavy-handed at times. But coming back to the benefits of working in partnership, working with these other organisations that come in without that kind of different agenda, that can really engage, know the landowners, know the farming practices, and have those conversations with them has been really key in getting sites on the ground and getting landowner buy-in to the different schemes and different measures that we've wanted to put in and try as part of the pilot projects. So Trent Rivers Trust kind of method for engagement is to send letters out to the catchment, introducing themselves, introducing the project, and starting to make that connection with the landowners. Then to go and do a site walkover where there's no obligations, but they're wanting to learn about the land, where the flow routes are, what issues the landowners have, and to work with them to have a look at what kind of types of solutions might fit in with the practice and that land and that site. They've also used parish councils or flood action groups to contact landowners if there's not a direct way in with them. And once meeting landowners, it's really key to understand their point of view, to have that two-way conversation with them. So you might do an outline design and chat with the landowner about whether that feels right, modify it, and it's clear to the landowners that it's not absolutely fixed. They can feed into it, and then they've got a say in that process, and that really gets more buy-in from the landowners in the long run. And it kind of gets measures that fit better with that landscape and how that land is used. And it's also kind of key to be flexible as well in those conversations. But if there's a certain point where you feel it really needs to be pushed, to stand the ground. And some of the measures that we've managed to get in on agricultural land, the field corner buns have been really good. So these are ones that can be set alongside arable practice, so you can crop right up to the bund. So they're designed to cut off flow rates before the water comes off the field and goes into the brook. And they do have a pipe within them that's set at a certain level to control that discharge back into the watercourse. And we've got some footage of them filling up at different times of events as well. We've also used quite a lot in the Cockabet catchment these leaky barriers. So they're across existing ditches where there's quite a lot of capacity for storage, and they're set at a level that allows base flows through, but then starts to impound water at a certain level. And also the idea is that they'll help to slow the water, drop sediment out, so that there's a little bit of the water quality improvement elements around those as well. Throughout all of the NFM schemes that I've been involved in, it's been really important to have a backup. All sites are different and all landowners are different, and sometimes they've got definitely a varied approach to engagement. Some really interested, some not bothered, some don't want you to be on their land. So you might work up opportunities, come across hurdles, and you just can't get those sites on the ground. And so it's really important to engage widely at the start, have quite a few options, and then kind of start being able to narrow those down to what you can actually get on the ground, and try and target where you can be most effective as well. Throughout the design, particularly for the Soar NFM, we really wanted to try and test this approach of replicating natural processes, and Atkins, our designers, really went with that with us. So the top picture is Narborough Bog Nature Reserve. It's a triple SI designated for its reed bed and its wet woodland and wet grassland environments. It's sat across the only bit of peat in Leicestershire, and the site had been drying out for years. There's very close to the M1, there's housing estates, there's a railway line that goes through the middle of it. It's got quite a few issues in terms of encroachment and drainage. So what we wanted to do is we worked with the landowners, Leicestershire and Rutland Wildlife Trust, to design features that were married in with that nature reserve ethos and fitted within the landscape. So there were a number of trees already across the watercourse. So the top right picture is one of the trees that we fell in a certain level to interact with those flood flows. That pushes water into the nature reserve through into the wet woodland area to hold it in there for longer and let it slowly come out of that area. And what we've seen is that we've got a number of flow paths that have changed slightly coming through the nature reserve, the woodland area, and we're just pulling in the data now to have a look at how that's affected the habitat. All the features were in November 2019, so we've got a few years to wait till we see that ecological response and can tell exactly what it's doing. But it seems to be holding water, slowing water at the moment, and hopefully it's benefiting that wet woodland and the reed bed environment on that site. Also key, you can see some here, some of the features. We tried to blend those in with woodland. All the material is locally sourced from the woodland area itself. As it was a triple SI, we worked with Natural England and the Wildlife Trust to fell a number of trees. So we had a quota of 10 that we could fell. And then we worked to be able to design those into different measures to test them. So the top right hand one is a series of 3 trees that were felled across a depression within the woodland, the old Oxbow area. And that creates a bund across that area and slows the rate that the water comes back into the River Soar. We've also had depressions in the woodland from its historic use as growing willow as a crop. So what we've tried to do is use the offcuts and stuff from the trees that were felled to, in effect, provide wood buns within those areas and slow the flow of water coming back off the site. As with all kind of schemes, we don't want to overkill features that are easy to get in. So it's been really key to have proportionate design. And I think that's really helped the contractors, EcoSolid as well, when we were getting these schemes on the ground. So these are the kind of design sheets that Atkins produce with a quite clear what's the measure for, why is it there, how to construct it, but also giving a bit of parameters. So say if the conditions change on the day, can we choose a different tree? Those kind of side of things, if it doesn't fall quite how it was meant to, how can we do a bit of adaptive design when we get on site based on those conditions, fixing conditions, and crucially we've got that health and safety element in there as well. For bigger measures, so we've done a number of pond features that were quite big features. So this one here is a 70 by about 13 metre pond, and it was to take water from an existing pond, increase the storage capacity of that that's fed by a ditch, and slow the rate that that goes back into the River Soar. And the alignment and design of this was quite key to try and fit in with that with the visual aspect of the site. So it's designed with a bit of a wiggle to try and recreate the historic channel alignment, and then it's got a varied depth as well and sloping margins to get the most ecological kind of design that we could get, but also maintain that water storage capacity. So having a more detailed design for this section and to be able to calculate the cut fill balance and the earth movements and get a bit more accurate costing was quite key in this scenario. So I've just got some photos zooming in on one of our sites. So this is our Croft site, which is on the River Soar. And for this site, we're working on the edge of an arable field. The arable field suffers a lot from flooding, and the farmer finds it very hard to crop, particularly in the bottom end where we were working. So they've got a set aside area that they just gave up and let return back to nature. As you can see from the kind of flood modelling and the levels, it's got an old paleo channel. So in the past, the River Soar's been straightened, it's been pushed to the eastern side of the site. And what we were trying to do here was create bund and cut off and pond and cut off the flow routes of the water coming back into the river soar and coming from a ditch network as well. So the photo at the top is the site just before we trimmed it, and the bottom photo on the screen is the pond with the guy standing on the bund on the right hand side there. And the pond that we created is about 60 by 30 meters, and you've got a large bund that wraps around that end. When we were building the pond, we managed to hit a land drain that the landowner didn't tell us was there. I'm not quite sure if they knew. So there is a land drain going into the pond that's providing some feed to that. And it also continues under the bund into a ditch network at the far side that runs into the river Soar as well. These are some pictures of the bund that we created. So it was all using local materials from site because it was pretty clayey on site and we had quite cohesive material. So that was built up and compacted. And then we've got a layer of Hessian net that's over the top of that. And then that's compacted again with slop, which is in essence very wet material from site that's now baked. And we seeded that with a wildflower mix. And you can see the pond has an island because in conversations with the landowner, they really wanted an island in the middle of the pond. So that was a concession we made to get this scheme on the site. You lose a little bit of storage, but you've got some extra margin there for hopefully some nice marginal plants to establish. And at the far end of the bottom picture, there is a reed bed area that's existing already. So the pond was designed to slope up gradually to that area. So the reeds will start to come into that pond and will start to create a bit more habitat there. These are some aerial views of it. So you can see the size and the scale of it. We've also planted 440 trees there now, which are on the flow routes going in. So that provides a little bit more evapotranspiration to that area, as well as providing that pond habitat and that storage there too. And we've got monitoring in as part of the project. So we've got monitoring in the main river source, just where the tree line is, and also within the pond section as well. So we can able to see and compare what's happening on site. These are some very initial data and outputs, and the time series is from the last month or so. And a big thanks to Ian and Marcus from Atkins for helping me interpret this data. So this is what we think is happening, and it's a fairly complicated picture. So at the start of the time series, we're seeing a dry catchment with small events, and the pond level near 1 is reducing, either due to evapotranspiration and some drainage going into the ditch from the land drain that's connected to the pond. At 2, we're seeing small events that are increasing the water levels within the river soar, but not affecting the pond that much. I would think that the increase at the pond at 2B is probably just from the local catchment and water running overland into that area. At 3, we see that big increase in terms of the pond levels, which is kind of matching what the river soar is doing. And we think that at this point, the ditch network that's beyond the bund is backing up, and we've seen the influence from that land drain filling the pond, as well as the water from the catchment running into that pond as well. Then we can see that reducing limb at 4A as the water slowly comes out of the pond and isn't showing the spikes that the river is through that time. So I think this is a slow discharge of the pond back through that land drain and the ditch network into the river soar. And at 5, this is where water would maybe just about be spilling out of bank from the river soar, but it's definitely not overtopping the bund because the bund's at a slightly higher level. So we can see this is the data that we're starting to get back. We're working with a PhD student at Heriot-Watt University, and over the coming year we'll be analysing all of the data we've got from all of our sites, looking at the effectiveness of the different measures and what impacts we're having from those, and how much more we would need across the whole catchment for the soil to make a difference. And I think that those were kind of examples of live projects we've got on the ground, but we're still starting to think around, right, how do we mainstream natural flood management? How do we get it into business as usual? And visually from the pictures and the schemes that we've gone, we can see there's lots of benefits. It hits a lot of those drivers in terms of habitat creation, flood risk, carbon sequestration, but we're still struggling with those kind of questions on how much do you need in a catchment to make a difference, to reduce that risk to communities, where do you start, and how much it will cost. So the stuff I've got on the next slide is just a bit of a snapshot of some of the work that we've got ongoing in the outputs in terms of the East Midlands area, to take a bit more strategic approach to natural flood management and weigh catchments off against each other and look and try and answer those questions on how much we would need. So we've done a very similar exercise in the soil, working with Atkins, and this has been working elsewhere in the East Midlands with Arable, looking at the methodology for this. So we've now got NFM Opportunity Mapping for about 10 catchments. We're doing some more this year. And we've pulled together all the desk-based information to look at what types of measures would be best suited for a catchment in 250 grid squares. So we've got the first, second and third measures within each of those squares in a GIS format. And we took the cut at 20%. So which of the top measures would be the 20% most effective within that catchment? Combined with that, we're then running it through an aggregated storage model to look at broken down into subcatchments based on that measures and that percentage of storage. And we can start to pull together what the difference in flow, and these are all optimized for the 1 in 20 year return period. So we can start to pull that picture together of what the benefits could be for these and tie it back to communities at risk as well, to answer that question of how much you would need to make a difference. And then we can pull it together into a summary, kind of one slide to help disseminate to stakeholders and work with partners to try and start having those conversations around what's the scale of the task, how much you would need within that catchment, what that means, what the percentage peak reduction would be, and how you can tie and build projects together. So just some final thoughts. I think definitely going forwards, opportunity mapping linked to storage assessments is going to be really helpful to build, prioritise resource and also build more effective projects. Stuff has developed over the past 4 years. We've been working on the pilot programs, and I think if we had that right at the start of all of the catchments, it would have been really helpful to try and target efforts rather than moving to the will of landowners. You could have built up your mechanisms for how you incentivise them and have a bit more effective conversations with the landowners. Going back to landowners, we kind of hit a capacity in terms of how much you could get in with goodwill, and you do need some incentives. So it will be interesting to see how ELMS develops in the future and how that can tie in with getting more measures on land and landowners also getting more benefit from it as well. These types of projects appeal to a wide range of partners, and it was very easy to pull together a group of interested partners. Not all of them necessarily wanted to lead on delivery, but they were all keen to be part of that process and learn as we go along, and it ticked many drivers for them as well. And I think working over a large geographic areas, its challenges. You initially working with a lot of different stakeholders. It can be quite hard to manage or to know where to start and to know how to get these schemes on the ground. But I think the benefits that you can get in terms of restoring that habitat, reducing flood risk, improving water quality, it really outweighs the pain at times of trying to work out how to get the projects on the ground. And then I've just got some links to case studies here. So one of the sites that I just touched on at Narborough Bogs is on Siworm's film Adapted for Tomorrow's Environment. So if you want to see some live footage and interviews about that, check that out. And we've also got a couple of case studies in the Engineering with Nature Atlas as well for Narborough Bog and Ellis Meadows on the Soar. So definitely have a look at those if you want to know more. And thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Alex. Really interesting. And we do have some questions, so I'll just have a look at those. Okay, question from Emma Hammond. In addition to flood risk alleviation, have you been able to quantify the wider benefits of the schemes you've implemented? And were there any surprises?
So right at the start, for the ones for the SOAR NFM, I did an ecosystem services valuation for that. And what I've not gone and done is the kind of retrospective crunching of the numbers of what we've managed to produce. We've also got ecology surveys that are linking with those schemes as well. So it's a little bit too early to tell. So some of the ponds are like 6 months to a year old now. So we've not seen those, the change in the community start to come in and colonise those. So I think it will be over the next few years that we'll be able to pull that information together and kind of see what change in terms of the ecological benefit we've had.
Okay, thank you. Another question here is, how do you incentivise landowners to give land over for, say, flood storage or new habitat, knowing that the benefits could take several years to show?
Yeah, it's not easy. What we've kind of found, and I know what other projects have found as part of the pilot programme, is that it's easier to work with big landowners because the ask on them for taking a small amount of land proportionately isn't as much, so they're not kind of losing that much. So those kind of big landowners and those big estates have been easier to work with and easier to get measures on their land. Where we've worked with smaller landowners, the Rivers Trust have been really good in trying to talk them round. There's a little bit of payment incentive but for maintenance of the features, but it's not much. And a lot of the time they try to fit them onto unproductive land. So I think it will take time for the landowners to see the benefits, but having example sites and photos and showing where it's done elsewhere helps to unlock some of the questions that they've got. But I think longer term we do need a payment mechanism for using those bits of land, otherwise we're just not going to get the amount of measures in a catchment that we need to make that ultimate difference.
Okay, thank you. There seems to be concerns of slowing the flow at certain conditions that actually cause the different river peaks to coincide or increase flood risk, and how that differs from the whole catchment area, from the Peak District to the River Soar to the tidal Trent.
Yep. So part of the thing that we were working with ARIT really recently is on that NFM Opportunity Mapping and the aggregated storage model. So that splits catchments down into subcatchments, and it looks at how much storage you think you can get within those subcatchments, and it looks at that risk of peak synchronization as well at that certain community. So what we have found that with some of the outputs is that it is suggesting measures in some of the subcatchments, but not the others, because you are seeing disbenefits from that peak synchronization. So I think, yeah, it's important to do that kind of assessment. If you think you're going to get that quantity of measures in the catchment, it's going to make that difference. So you know what you're playing with, you know what you're working with and what your parameters are and what the risk is.
Okay. In relation to the ecological surveys you mentioned, to quantify the wider biodiversity, do you have the timings for it? I mean, how long?
Timing. So we're doing kind of PSIM on the ponds, and our analysis and reporting team are doing that for us. And I mean, you're probably generally waiting 5 years or so before you see that ecological change. So it will be a little bit of time, and that's just because of when we've managed to get our features in.
Okay. Different from a different question from a different angle. Local authorities, is there any hesitation when looking at schemes that are not exclusively within their own boundary?
They've been pretty good. So on the SOAR, we were working with 4 different local authorities, just because of the nature of where we were looking. And we had one of the district councils that was involved in our scheme, but we didn't actually end up putting any measures within their locality. But they still played a good part on our steering group as well, and we're really keen to input and be part of that. I think it comes down to each local authority, the appetite and the people within it. But yeah, I generally found that they've been quite good at working together.
Okay. Leaky barriers, do they allow fish passage?
If they're designed right, yes. So quite a lot of the leaky barriers we put have been on drainage ditches that are they're not wet all the time, so you wouldn't get fish within there. Where we put stuff like so the tree at Narborough across the watercourse, and also some of the other barriers on bigger watercourses, it's been set at a level that allows the base to flow through, so it's not impacting upon that fish passage aspect of it. I think if you were designing it as a weir, so it was completely touching the bottom, you'd have much more of an issue. But we did involve our fisheries officer throughout in terms of the design and the approach that we were taking. So it's key to pull in those kind of people and specialisms if you've got any issues or worries about it.
And I guess a similar sort of question really in terms of the benefits, but what are the disadvantages of NFM, I think, rather than leaky barriers per se?
Yeah, it's not as simple as it looks. I think it definitely varies between catchments and what you're doing. It's quite site specific, but you still don't necessarily get around consents, planning permission, all the stuff that you'd normally get on a project. And when you're dealing with trying to get stuff in on a large number of sites and working with a large number of landowners, it can be quite hard to manage. So managing that geographical extent of the project and that input that's needed is challenging at times.
Okay, and similarly, the roles of different RMAs, and how do you work with the lead local flood authorities?
Yeah, so actually in both of the pilot projects, they were involved as partners on the project, and we kind of worked with them and brought them along. We talked to them. They had sight of what sites we were working at, where we might need their input in terms of ordinary watercourse consent. We had chats right at the start about the scale of that and what it might mean on their resources, and just kind of brought them through on that process as well. And I think for quite a lot of the catchments in East Mids, the LLFAs are really interested in NFM because they've got surface water flooding issues, they've got issues from ordinary watercourses as well. And working at a catchment scale, you're going to be hitting and trying to target some of those issues too. So they're definitely kind of working with them to help build schemes is a real benefit.
Okay, I have a funding question now. Do we typically get any large financial contributions from others outside of the EA to do this work?
So the schemes that I've been have predominantly been DEFRA funded, but we also work with Moors for the Future Partnership in the Peak District, and they do get a lot of external funding. So there's quite a few different funding pots around. They get funding from the water companies and other organisations as well. So I think there is scope there. There's quite a lot of appetite around nature-based solutions, green recovery, carbon, net zero. So I think going into that funding environment, there's a lot more scope for getting in more money and external funders into this. It'll be also interesting to see how that kind of natural capital investment goes as well, and how that evolves over the next few years.
Okay. On the made ponds, do you do any plug planting or seeding to start the establishment, or do we leave it to nature?
I didn't on the ones that I showed in the pictures. There was one really early on in the slides that we did it about 5 years ago as part of a capital scheme in Leicester, and that was in a part that had quite high footfall, and we were trying to encourage more people to go to that area through the pond and the boardwalk stuff that we put in. We did do plug planting there, and generally ecological wise you'd leave it and you'd wait for stuff to colonize, but there's that public perception if they see bare ground and oh my god you've made a mess, and they want it green straight away. So it's trying to get those balance. But yeah, on the NFM ponds it's not seeded or plug planted. We're just letting it establish naturally. Okay.
Management of the host community's risk perception on specific types of NBS NFM adopted. How do we manage that?
I think it's just through those open conversations. And I mean, we've had some communities that are crying out for something, and until we get all the evidence and the science, you know, what you can get on the ground, it's really hard to say exactly what benefit and change you'll be making for that community, apart from they've got areas that they can walk, there's tree planted, they can go, they've got those amenity improvements. And I think it's about that conversation that you have with that community to manage those expectations. But where we've seen it with some, so say in the Cockabet catchment, they were just happy to have something done, happy to see that something was happening, albeit it might not immediately solve their problem.
Okay, I've got 3 more questions here at the moment. I'm conscious of time, so apologies if anybody doesn't get their question immediately answered, but we will endeavour to make sure that's made available in the Q&A. Do you see NFM as part of the capital FCRM schemes, or additional, or something in between?
Yeah, both. So I think what we really want to do is pull that into the FCRM programme. So that's part of the reason for doing the kind of opportunity mapping, is to start to look at the cost benefits of those big catchment schemes and to bring that into the programme alongside the more traditional solutions. And I think ideally it's to try and get it so that NFM is on that long list of options when you're starting a capital scheme, and that you've got enough information and evidence to take that through as a viable or option, because you've got a little bit more around it. Whereas a flood wall, we know how much it's going to cost. We do them quite a lot. We know what benefits it's going to get. It's trying to pull NFM into a little bit more of the same realm, so you can have those same conversations around which options you pull forward on a scheme, and you've got the evidence for the cost benefits around it.
Okay, leaky barriers, do they need a lot of maintenance?
Yeah, I think leaky barriers are easiest to get in, but they do, yeah, it depends how they get, really, and what material they're made with. So when we tried to do them, we tried to use kind of like big trunks and trees that aren't going to move and are keyed into the banks as well. If you're kind of using smaller material, it does have more risk of needing more maintenance on them. But I think that's something that this Syria design guide, when that's released, I'll have a little bit of information within that around the design of those.
Okay, yeah, and the last question, I think is quite appropriate. What are the next steps? How do you see this progressing? Opportunity opportunity maps?
Yep. So the opportunity maps that I showed are really kind of hot off the press. So we need to work with partners in the area to disseminate that and understand what it means as well. And what we really want to do is try and help partners, if they've got schemes that aren't necessary for flood risk, but they're still NFM nature-based, to put them in the most effective places possible to have benefits to those communities, and look at how we work together to build these projects and spread it widely across catchments.
Okay, we'll just squeeze one more in. As a researcher working with NBS to manage flood risk, what are the main trade-offs and synergies you've learned working with the stakeholder community that I should be aware of from your research?
Sorry, can you repeat that again, Tom?
Yeah. As a researcher working with NBS to manage flood risk, what are the main trade-offs and synergies you've learned working with the stakeholders kind
I think everyone comes to it with a different hat on. So kind of driving it with the flood risk side of it, but you've got those benefits in terms of habitat creation and carbon, and it's about working out what each stakeholder's hooks are and being able to communicate in a way that it makes sense to them, and to look at, in part, who's best to lead certain aspects of the project and how you can work together to be able to meet everybody's goals.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Well, that leaves me at the end, and we're just about in time. So thank you very much for that really interesting presentation, Alex, and answering all the questions so well. So as I said before at the beginning, we have been recording, and hopefully we'll be able to launch this in a few weeks' time. And I hope everybody's found it really interesting.